On your text logo stuff, I just wanted to show some extra things that you could use to maybe add to it. Remember, I want you to take the one you had last time and just not scrap it, but just set it aside, rebuild the whole thing from scratch, and that way you get a better sense of redoing all these processes, because it really helps kind of enforce all the stuff that we've gone through. So here's some extra stuff that will kind of add to it. So one of the things that people want to do with text is usually not just keep it as a block of text. They may want to animate the individual pieces. The way that this one was created was I went to File, Import, and I imported the individual curves. So remember, we have the Illustrator file. So when I import this, there it is, I get the curves in here, and then I can just grab the individual curves and go to the hotbox, go to Surfaces, and go to Bevel Plus. And I can do that for each one of these and create the individual surfaces that I could then grab and move around individually. And just like we animated our camera kind of sweeping through, the same way we animated our planets is the same way that I could animate each one of these things. So if I turn on my stuff here that someone hid, restore all, there we go. I could grab this letter, I'm at frame 1, and I'm going to just set a key for my translates. Then I can go up to frame 30 and pull it out of there and set a key. Okay? So there it is, the S going away. Now the same way that I made the S go away, I could bring the letters back. So if I'm kind of like assembling my name or trying to get it to land into a certain spot, I can go up to, let's say, 80 and grab the H and set a key, then go back to frame 40 and pull it out of the way and set a key. So now what's going to happen is the S goes away and then the H drops in place. Okay? So you can see how I can animate individual components of this in different ways. And I'm just setting one keyframe for where I want it to be here, one keyframe where I want it to be there, and Maya will figure out all the in-between stuff. If I want to do something like fancy to the A, I could take the A, let's say at 80 I want it to be there, so I'm going to keyframe the translates and the rotates. Then I'll go back to 45. I'm going to pull it back and rotate it a little bit and pull it like way off here. There we go. And then I'll set my keyframe again. And now when I go play, here comes the A kind of spinning into place. Okay? Now I could also scale. So I can click on one of these guys, go to my scale, keyframe it, go back, shrink it down really tiny, and key it, and now I'll get this. So you can use individual components. You could animate translates, rotate, scales, multiply, or do them together, do them individually, whatever you want. And that's, you know, sometimes that's sufficient. For this one, what I want to do is I want to animate more of it. I want to give this more of like a bendy look to it. So I can actually take the letters and kind of have them deform a little bit. So if I were to grab one of these letters like this, and I go to my hotbox again, and I go to this deform menu right there, and I go to the create nonlinear, and I go to bend, I get this little handle right here. Okay? And I keep the handle centered, that way it knows this is the area that I'm bending. And I go down to the bend handle here, and I go to curvature, and I just middle mouse button click and drag. You can see how now I can deform that individual letter to give it a little bit of a dance. Okay? Now it's bending this way, so it's going like that. So if I were to take this handle that's bending this way and I rotated it that way, it would bend the S forward and backward. Okay? And if I go to wireframe, you can see how it's bending. Then I can go to my rotate and just rotate this around. Okay? And I'm just going to reset this to -90. There we go. And so now if we look at the curvature, you can see how I'm getting this S to actually bend pretty neatly. Okay? Now you may want to know, how do I get it to not do it from both ways? I only want the top to bend, like it's, you know, the bottom staying in position. Well, there's options for it. So basically, if you think it's possible. Typically it is possible. It's just a matter of finding where that option is. And so for this bend handle, it's right over here with these low bound and high bound. If I take the low bound off to 0, you can see how the bottom doesn't do anything. I'll put it back to -1. You can see how there's a little bottom handle here that's also bending. When I put this to 0, that goes away. Okay, so then what I can do is take this, and if I do my curvature, you can see how it's only bending that part there. All right, well, I'm going to take this and pull it down and make this bigger. And now I can take the curvature and like flop this back and forth. And again, it gives you just a different kind of look besides just having a solid letter just kind of popping in there, just sitting there on the ground. It gives a little bit more interest to your scene. Now there's other ones, so I'm going to leave the S here, and I can keyframe all this. Everything gets keyframeable in Maya. So I'm going to key it. I'm going to go up to 20. I'm going to flip it backwards. I'm going to key it again. I'm going to go up to 40. Keyframe it forward. Key it again. 60. There is, and there's other ways to even do that quicker. But for now, I'm keeping it as simple as I can. Because S would key everything, but we don't want to key everything ever. Because what happens is, when we keyframe everything, if I wanted to go and edit this, then I'm seeing everything there, and it just becomes more complex. Now I'll show you on the next one how I can do this even quicker. All right, so there's my S. Okay. So now, excuse me. On the H, I can go to Deform, go to Nonlinear, and there's a bunch of these. There's Flare, there's Sine, there's Squash, there's Twist. I'll do Twist on the H. And for Twist, I can go into the start angle and go, ooh, okay. Or I can do the end angle and twist that. So let's say I wanted this H just to do a little shimmy back and forth like this. I can do that. So here's how my quicker way is to do that exact thing, is I'm going to write a little expression. All right, we need it quicker. There we go. And go a little bit further. And a little bit faster. There we go. So now they kind of match. Okay? So now that thing that I just pulled up was an expression. And it's basically a way for us to take the keyframing out of it and leave it up to math. So what it's doing is, if you remember from high school or from the bus stop when people were talking about sine curves, that was a joke. Sine curves, right? So in math class they have the sine curve. Okay, so the sine curve is basically being mapped to the frames on the bottom. So as my frames progress, as my frames move along, it's moving along this sine curve. And so what that's doing is it's fluctuating this thing here. So that thing is just going up and down and up and down. So it gives it a really easy way for us to do something like that. If you don't remember what a sine curve is, and it's S-I-N, not S-I-G-N, if you were thinking it was the other one. Or it's S-I-N-E, apparently. That's the sine curve. So that's what that is doing, is it's taking those values, just the value of that movement, and just going up and down that graph. So then we're able to get this kind of movement. Okay, then I could take the A and I could do something similar to the A. So I can go to my Deform, go to my Nonlinear, and I can do Squash. Okay, and with Squash, I can go to my Factor and go. Okay, and just like the other one, I can pull this handle down to the bottom, take off the low bound, maybe scale it up a bit, and then do the factor, and you can see what the A is going to look like from there. Okay, now I could again write a little expression. Oops, not that. Write a little expression for this. I'll even use cosine for this one. Cosine of frame divided by 5 times, I don't know, 2. I don't know if that's going to be too much or too little. Yeah, it's too much. times 0.5. There we go. There we go. So you can see how very quickly we can just animate all these characters kind of doing something a little bit silly. Now your next question might be, can we do this to all of them at the same time? And of course we can do that to all of them at the same time. Now if I were to grab all of them at the same time, let me rewind this. And I actually have some letters here that I'm just going to bevel plus real quick, and then I'll grab those. Plus. Oops. All right, so I'm just going to grab these ones here, and I'm going to delete any animation I might have on them. And then I could go to my deform, create nonlinear, bend. And you can see how I can then, because I grabbed them all at the same time, I'm bending all of them at the same time. Okay? So it's a fun way to be able to do that. I could even move this bend deformer, and it'll kind of like swivel that back and forth. I could twist it, and it'll change how this is doing that. And again, all of these properties can be animated, so they could animate all of this stuff here. Okay? Now sometimes you're going to get some funky behavior when you do this to these letters. Because of how this surface is created, you might get something weird happening here. So I want to also show, there's a lot of stuff going on the screen. Let me take my letter. There we go. Just going to pull my curves over here. Okay, so I'm just going to take the letter A and just re-bevel plus that one. Okay. So on here, I can take just this curve. Okay, just those curves there, and I can do stuff to the curve. So if I go to deform nonlinear and I do, let's say, a sine wave, and this one has a bunch of different options, so I'm going to add a little amplitude. Oops, 0.1, that's good. Wavelength 1, and then offset, I'm just going to keyframe. Oh, it's too fast, too fast. There we go. So now we have this A, and it looks pretty good, but it's going side to side. Let's say I wanted this to go front to back. So I'm going to go to my curve. I'm going to rotate it around that way. There we go. And it's still rotating like this, okay? Because it's on the curve itself and not the piece of geometry. If I did it to the geometry, it would definitely go that way. All right. So I'm going to grab the curve again. And you can see as I do it to the curve, it's also doing it to the piece of geometry. I'll go to squash, go to factor, there it is. There it is. So you see here on the A how we're getting this weird behavior where it's basically getting rid of that A shape. Okay? Because of where the curves are, you can see they start to intersect. That confuses Maya, and it kind of freaks out a little bit. Okay? So sometimes when you do stuff like this, you want to do it to the actual geometry. Sometimes you want to do it to the curve. And if you do it to the curve and you get some funky behavior, you do it to the geometry and you get some funky behavior, sometimes you have to go in and redraw that shape. So here, down on the bottom, I've redrawn this A in Illustrator. There it is. And I've added a little notch to it. Okay? So instead of it having the solid A like we had before, oops, like that, and I'll make it bigger so we can see it. Instead of having this solid A here, I went through and cut this out. Now you can use the scissor tool and just go click on the path to cut it there, click on the path to cut it there, click on the path to cut it, click on the path to cut it. Now what that does is just cuts it. Then I can use my pen tool to connect those edges. Okay, now that didn't work that time. It worked last time. Let's try that again. So I've cut that. I cut Come on. Cut this. Cut that. All right. Pen tool again. Click here. Click there. There we go. So you just have to do it twice, apparently. And then we can just delete these extra little pieces hanging out in the middle. Okay? So now that I have that cut open, now I'm not going to get any issues inside of Maya. The other thing that might cause issues are these little pointy things, and we kind of saw those last time when we were playing. And what we can do with those is that we can round those off. So we can go to our pen tool and we can round these pieces off, and that will give us nicer behavior. Okay. So I'm just converting those into curvy points in order to create that. And it might take some cleanup in here too. I might need to go through and just kind of clean up some of these points in order to maintain the integrity of this. Oops, too far there. Okay. Now there's also some things in Illustrator, these little dots. And when you get these, you can actually click and drag and round things off. So I can actually create this here, bring that into Maya, whatever program we're using, and start to play with it that way too. So anything that you want to create inside Illustrator, sometimes it may take some cleanup. It may take some going back and forth to do that. But a lot of basic shapes will start off with curves. They start off with this Illustrator type stuff in order to create that appearance. Okay? So don't be afraid to play around with some of these deformers under the nonlinear right here in order for them to do stuff. There's a bunch of other deformers outside of this. That's extra stuff that wouldn't apply to what we're doing. Okay? Like you might look at the jiggle, wherever that was down here, and think it's going to jiggle. It's not. That's for something totally different. Stick to these nonlinear ones under the deform, and they typically will do some neat thing that you could add to yours to make it look a little bit more interesting than just a blah piece of text. Okay? So I'm just going to save these. And then I wanted to show, the other thing I want to show was just how we can add a little bit more detail to these things without, just by adding some texture to it. Okay? Last time we just added a basic color. Okay, so I just had this green color right here. But what I can also do is click on the little map, and we did this when we did the planet one. And for the map, I'm going to click on File. And what that allows me to do is allows me to bring in my own picture that I could drop onto the text. So if I go to Internet Explorer, there it is, and I go to CGTextures, this is a really cool website that has a bunch of free textures. It's free to register for it. It's 15 megabytes a day you get to download stuff. And you get all of this really, really cool free textures. That's not my password. There we go. You can buy an account, and it's like $100 for the year. And you get to download a lot more information, or $200 a year, and you get to download a lot of stuff. But let's say if I wanted metal. Here's a bunch of different kinds of metal that I could use for my text. Okay, so if I wanted this to look like that, let's say. All right, so I'm going to grab this one. Now you'll see there's one that says tiled here. Tiled means that whatever's on the left side of the image lines up perfectly with whatever's on the right side of the image. Whatever's on the top lines up perfectly with whatever's on the bottom. What that gives us is the ability to take this image and duplicate it a bunch of times all over the surface and it not look like it's repeating as obviously. So like this guy here, if I were to take this and duplicate that texture here and here, you would definitely see a seam, right? Because the bottom has the rust and the top has the metal. Okay? Where this one, they brought it into Photoshop and they've cloned it so that you don't get those seams. All right? And you could even do a preview. Here's the preview. There it is. So this is 3 by 3. You can't tell. Here's 5 by 5. You can't really tell. Here's 7 by 7. Oops. Let me zoom out. There it is. And you can start to kind of tell it a 7 by 7 that you're seeing it, because it looks like this pattern is here, 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 and there. Okay. At 3 by 3, it's not as obvious. Okay. So, oops. So I want to download that texture. So I'm going to close that. Oops, I'm going to click on that again. And I'm going to download it. Now, because I'm not a premium member, I can only download the ones that it allows me to. So this small one at 700 is going to be good enough. Okay, so there's my texture. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to put it into my text logo source images. There we go. And now I'm just going to connect that texture to that file node. So now when I hit 6, now I have that texture on here. Okay, so if I look close, you can see how I kind of have that metal texture. Now what this is doing is, it's basically we have a 3D object and we have a 2D image. So taking this 2D image and putting it on a 3D object doesn't always look super nice and smooth. If I go to my Bevel Plus, there it is. If I go to my Bevel Plus, there it is. It puts this polyplanar projection on there. Okay, so this polyplanar projection is basically it's projecting this texture on there. So think of like this projector up here. If I were to put a 3D sphere in front of that, that image would just like spread out, right? Like the front of it would look nice and crisp, but then as it went around the edges, it would look a little bit softer. So that's what it's doing to this, is it's just kind of projecting it from a certain angle. So what I'm going to do is just go to UVs. I'm going to say automatic and just see what happens. It'll probably take a second. There it goes. But now if we look at it, you can see that this actually looks like there's that texture kind of sort of on it. Okay. Now this isn't the best way to do a texture, but it's the quick and dirty way to add something to it. So it's more than just this color. It's something a little bit more detail to it. So as this is going, it's thinking over here on this screen, and then I'll pull it over so we can see it. You'll see that the text is going to look a little bit more distinguished because it has a little bit more story to it. There we go. Pull it over. Come on. There we go. Okay. So instead of it just being a flat color, which was my green, now we have this metal color, which can add to the look of it. We could of course swap that out very quickly. We can just go back to here. And we could pick something like a rock. Okay, and again, I'm looking for something that's tiled and something that looks plausible. It wouldn't be very plausible to use something like this on there because it doesn't look like a cliff at all, right? It looks more like, no, not even that. Like something like that, maybe it could. Or this, definitely it could. Or that. I like this one. Okay. So I'm going to grab this guy here, and again, I'm going to grab the tiled one. And I'll save it. It's thinking. Open the folder. I'm going to take my cliffs, put it in my source images, and then all I have to do is go back to that material, go back to that text material I created, go back to the arrow, go back to the folder, and pick on my new one. And so now I have that rock texture on there. And I think the metal one probably looked a little bit better. I'm going to click this save button here. I'm going to click the render button there. And what the save button does is allow me to compare. I can compare what my previous image looked like and what my new image looks like. So there's the previous one and the new one. So I like the metal one better. Okay, so I can always go back to that. I can always just click on it, click the arrow, click the folder, switch it back to Rust Paint. And now it's back. Now there's another thing that I can do to this just to give it a little bit more realism. If we look at that, it looks still a little bit too crisp and clean. If you look at the edge right here, you can see how this reflection or that specularity is a little bit too smooth. If this is rusted metal, it wouldn't be nice and smooth. It would be kind of pitted or scratched up or whatever. Okay. So what I'm going to do is in my text material, all the way on the bottom, there's a bump map. And on the bump map, I'm going to click the map button again for either one of these. I'm going to go to the file again. I'm going to go to this file tab up here, go to this folder here, and find that rust paint. Okay. And on this rust paint, watch what's going to happen now. I'm just going to grab a section of this. Nope, I'm going to save it and then render the whole thing again. But what we should have now is now we actually have some more pitting to this where it's going to look like actual metal, actual bump to it, actual depth to it, besides just the coloration. Okay, and you can already see it on here. It doesn't look like it's nice and smooth. It actually looks like it's pitted. It looks like it has some depth to it. So there's the previous, there's the new. So you see how it adds that level of detail to it just by adding that bump depth. Now you could look at that and say, well, maybe this is too bumpy. Okay, that's too smooth, definitely. This is too bumpy. So on this guy, I have to go to my bump, click on the arrow, and that takes me to the file. Now in the file, there's something that it's actually skipping. Okay, so I want to show this. I'm going to go to, actually this guy. This little orb right here is the Hypershade. Okay, all the materials, all the shaders, all the stuff that we're doing is listed in the Hypershade. And when you do texturing like this, you're going to spend quite a bit of time in the Hypershade. So here's my text. That's the little guy that represents what the text looks like. There he goes. So I'm going to click on this and then hit this double arrow. And what that does is it shows me this connection here. So I can move around just like I would in Maya and zoom in just like I would in regular Maya view. You just can't obviously spin around inside here. So here's my text, and it's showing me here's the rusted paint that went into my color. Here's the place 2D texture of how it's getting placed. And then here's the bump that we put on. Here's the texture for the bump, and here's the place 2D texture for that. So just to kind of keep things separated, I'm just going to separate these guys. There we go. I just didn't like the lines being crossed. Okay? So this is probably very, very new to all of you. This is a node graph view. So what we're seeing is instead of looking at this in a kind of like a list, like in After Effects or in Photoshop, you might see a list of effects. You know, the top thing is first, then this, then this, then this happens. In here, it's showing you connections. It's showing you where it's getting information and what it's doing. So this rust paint right here is basically taking the out color information and putting it into the diffuse. Okay, remember diffuse is color. So it's basically taking this color information and putting it into this color area. Okay. Then it's also taking the alpha channel and applying it here too. Now the alpha channel is not being used. I could actually just click this and delete it, and it won't do anything different. Okay. But alpha channel is transparency. So if this was a transparent object, I would definitely want to use that. Now down here, here's the bump that we set up. It's taking this guy here, which is all the bump information, and sending it over into that bump. It gets the bump information from that same file. Okay? So it's taking, in this case, it's using the out alpha into the bump value, and the bump value goes into that. This will all make more sense as you start to play with this. So what I need to do in here is I need to grab this bump depth and go to the attribute editor for this. There it is. Because the bump depth up here has this. It has how much bump is being applied. So right now at 1, it was too much. So 0.05 should give me an okay amount. A little bit more. Okay, maybe 0.15. And I always type it in. You could use a scroll bar, but it's very, very clunky to do. There we go. We're really starting to break it up just slightly, just really slightly. 0.25. Okay, so this is just adding a level of depth to this just to kind of break up the surface and make it appear a little bit more realistic. Okay, this is the starting point for doing things that look photorealistic inside of Maya. All right, so there's our text material, and there's all the attributes too. So just so you can see this, maybe it'll lock it in a little bit more. Let's say that I had a reflectivity color. I wanted this color here to be the same reflection color. So I can grab this and say this color should also be the reflection color. And now it's connected. Now it's going to use this information as a way to change the color of the reflection. So now if I save and I re-render this, we'll get a slightly different appearance because now the reflection is going to be tinted a little bit. Okay, so you can see it's a little bit softer. Here it's a little bit crisper. Okay. We could also do stuff like, let's say I had a checkerboard. And I'm going to take this checkerboard and I'm going to take the alpha of this and drop it into reflectivity. So now what this means is that my reflection is going to be black and white. Okay, so in some areas it's going to be very reflective, in other areas it's not. Not really seeing a huge difference on this. So I'm going to go to my Place 2D texture. This guy will allow us to control how many repetitions we have. So right now on this Place 2D texture on this checkerboard, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 checkers going across. If I go to the Place 2D texture and I set this to 1 and 1, we'll see that the checkerboard actually looks like, come on. Well, if it updated, it'd be black, white, white, black. Okay, that's what it should be. There you go. Black, white, white, black. Okay, that's one item. And then as I repeat it more and more, it's going to take that same pattern and repeat that same pattern over and over again. Okay, so that's why this Place 2D texture is nice, because we are able to do that kind of thing. So now, just for fun, let's see if I'll see any difference. Now, it's so subtle you don't really see it. I'm sure it's there. Yeah, barely see something happening on that. Okay, but essentially what it's doing is just using that image as a way to control reflectivity. Okay, now I can also take my Place 2D texture for my rock, my rusty paint, and add some repetitions here. Remember, it's a tiled texture, so I can do that kind of thing. And what that should give me is, instead of this bigger, thicker texture, it should give me a more smaller texture. So instead of my rocks being, or my paint chips being this big, they should be much smaller. So you can see how tiny they are now. Okay? All of that kind of information goes into helping us figure out the size of it. If our paint chips are huge, we assume that this item is very small. If the paint chips are very tiny, we assume that the item is very big. Okay? So that's just another way to add some more detail to your scene. Now, just because I've shown those things doesn't mean that you need to do them. I'm just showing them so that you have that kind of under your belt. Now, another thing to keep in mind is you don't always want to texture everything, but sometimes just adding a basic color, so my background is this pinky color, and then going down to your bump and adding just a basic bump to this can really help add to the scene. So in here, I'm going to go and add a granite. There it is. And take this depth down. There we go. And so now what this granite's going to do is it's going to just give me a little bit of grain on top of my background. Okay? Imagine a perfectly smooth, crystal clear, or perfectly smooth surface for a background. It might look kind of boring. It might look kind of like CG. So adding this grain to it gives it a little bit more tooth, a little bit more detail. So here it is before, there it is after. Not a huge difference, but if I were to go into my render settings, I took my quality up and I rendered a little section. Okay, it may have been a little bit too subtle on that. Let me make it a little bit more pronounced. And let me go in here and just adjust some of the colors. There you go. So what we're going to get is, instead of this perfectly smooth surface, we're going to get something that has a little bit of granules to it. So imagine like a vinyl surface or a blanket or something. It's not perfectly smooth. There is some sort of texture to that, and that's what that would give us. Okay, so it just makes it look, again, a little bit more realistic. All right, so just a couple other things to play with as you're working on these. Play with the deformers a little bit. Play with the textures. It's always best, too, you just save out your file. So if I'm playing with textures, I don't want to ruin this, I can just save it and just say Sarcona name, before textures 02. And if I want to come back to the other one, I still have that one kind of waiting for me. Or if I want to play with deformers, save it as a before deformers, or save it as whatever. The cool thing about those deformers, all you have to do is delete the deformer and they go back to where they were. So if I want this to go back to default, I grab the deformer thing and delete it, and now it's back to where it was. Okay, grab the deformer, delete it, grab the deformer, delete it. You can see how they just all go back to where they were just by deleting those deformers. Okay, so just a couple other things that you can play with while you're working.